So in 2010, I made a poorly written and poorly edited fanzine, and I uploaded it to Mediafire. I made this fanzine with the print shop, and it let you save things into a PDF, so I just uploaded the PDF. I always liked fanzines and just kind of the weird homegrown, homemade feel of fanzines. Now, to give some context to this video, if you were early 2000s on the internet in any gaming forum, and you were talking games or even older games at the time, even around the time of the PS2 or around the 360, and you were talking about the PS1, one of the common misconceptions at the time was, well, the PS1 had a bunch of just crappy, terrible games. The N64 was so much better. Forums at the time, from my experience, the ones I frequented, was filled with a lot of Nintendo fanboys and a lot of disgruntled Sega fanboys who were just mad because the Dreamcast lost. I'm sorry the Dreamcast lost. It was a great system, but get over it. So in order to fight the misconceptions about the PS1, I wrote this piece called In Defense of the PS1, and I thought I'd read it to you. So I'm giving you some context, so this isn't my current thought. Luckily, the PS1 has gotten a lot more respect from gamers lately, but in the early dawn of the internet gaming forums, for me it was the early 2000s, it was rough being a PS1 gamer and a PS1 fan. That's just the context of this video. At the time, the PS1 was incredibly disrespected by a lot of people online. The general misconception about the system was that most of the games were terrible, but you know, there's Metal Gear Solid, Resident Evil, Gran Turismo, those were the only good. Crash Bandicoot, oh, Crash wasn't even that good, you couldn't move the camera. So this was my response to those who at the time had a misconception about the system. I hear it all the time from uninformed gamers. When talking about the PS1, they constantly attack it for having crappy games. They'll quote 5 or so games as the only quote-unquote good games for the system, and then proceed to tell me the rest of the PS1's library was crap. I'd be inclined to believe them if I didn't own nearly 200 PS1 games myself. Probably closer to 300 now, maybe even more. Yes, as with any supported system, it did have its share of crappy games. I've never seen so much misinformation about a popular gaming system. Both the NES and Super NES had piles of crappy games. It comes with the territory of being the most popular system of the day. However, both of those systems are remembered for their great games and not for the hordes of bad games. Why is there such a double standard when discussing the PS1? Perhaps the worst defense I've heard to bash one system while defending another system that isn't getting supported is its quality, not quantity. I have no problem if another system's games appealed more to you. I can understand liking another system better than the most popular system of the day. I'm not saying that everyone has to like the PS1 as much as I do, but the excuse of quality versus quantity has always been lame. By simple mathematics, the system with the higher quantity of games also has the higher quantity of quality games. Let's take for example the N64. I owned both a 64 and a PS1 at the time of their popularity. I had some great times with the N64. GoldenEye was my drug of choice, and I killed thousands of hours in the multiplayer. It was a good system, and is a good system to collect for now. However, throughout the system's life, there were massive gaming droughts. Some months, the N64 would get one game per 10 PS1 games. Now, were all 10 of those PS1 games that month great? Probably not. But even if there were 3 good ones out of those 10, that means the PS1 still had more worthwhile games to play that month. The pickings on the PS1 were never slim. The N64 would have a good month and then 3 or 4 of slim pickings. Quality versus quantity means your system doesn't have the support it needs. And if no one was bashing the Super NES for having tons of support in its day, then why does this idiotic argument still get thrown the PS1's way? It really doesn't actually make any sense. The name of the game is variety. The PS1 may not have had the best games in every genre, but at least it still had games in every genre. At the time, my main choice of genre was RPGs, and the PS1 was the king of RPGs in that generation. The Saturn had some great ones too, don't get me wrong, but I didn't own a Saturn Saturn until later, and I now don't feel like selling a kidney to play some of those RPGs. Beyond RPGs, I played everything except sports games, and if you wanted a system with everything, the PS1 was the main way to go. I love variety, and I have very erratic gaming habits. Variety is one aspect, but the PS1's library also had tremendous depth. Almost every system has gems that fall below the surface of the mainstream, but because of the sheer amount of games available on the system, the PS1 has tons of underrated, overlooked games. I'm amazed on how anyone who either never owned a PS1 or who never owned more than 20 games for it in its lifetime can comment on the system's library, quoting the same 5 or so games as being the quote-unquote only good ones. As I previously stated, I own around 200 PS1 games, have been playing the system since the summer of 1997, and I'm still discovering hidden gems that I overlooked. Games that got very little exposure and that even I, being the avid seeker of the obscure that I am, had overlooked. When a console can still surprise you over 15 years after its release, 27 now, then you know its library had an awe-inspiring amount of depth to it. I get the same way with the NES, Super NES, Genesis, PS2, and so many other great systems I still own and collect for. And the PS1 deserves just as much a place of honor as those previously mentioned consoles. In fact, from a personal standpoint, the PS1 is my favorite system of all time, and that's still true to this day. Not that the Genesis, NES, Super NES weren't great systems, but the PS1 has just been my most played system ever, and it bridges the gap between 2D games I love and the world of 3D gaming. The Saturn was better at 2D and arguably better at 3D when properly utilized, and the N64 was better at 3D. But to me, the PS1 will always be a perfectly balanced 2.5D system. Love it or hate it, the system has forever left its mark on gaming. So, maybe you should at least respect it.